I became really obsessed with this idea of like, if you have distribution, what can you like? You get to ask like this really interesting question of like, what can you build that's really authentic to your audience? And that's like the complete opposite problem of everything that you and I know from the startup world, which is like always looking for the problem to be solving and try how do you get those early customers?
Welcome to Media Empires, where we sit down with the most influential media creators right now to learn exactly how they built their empires. Our aim is to extract the secrets of top-tier podcasters, newsletter authors, and media creators who are breaking the old rules for media success. Whether you're looking to start your own empire or simply curious about the nuts and bolts behind media businesses, you'll find valuable insights and tactics in each episode. Grab your headphones, let's dive in.
Riverside is a presenting sponsor of Media Empires. It's an essential part of our tech stack. Riverside makes scaling a media business possible for us and so many podcasters and creators. It's our online recording studio, not just for the show, but across the entire podcast network. Riverside lets us record interviews with the best guests from wherever they are in the world. Our team can also cut short-form clips directly from Riverside, because as any listener of this show knows, you create once and then publish everywhere. Sign up for Riverside.fm today by following the link in the description box and use our code MEDIAEMPIRES to get a 20% discount.
I'm thrilled to talk with Blake Robbins. Blake Robbins is a venture capitalist at Benchmark, and he's also the host of Gamecraft podcast, a very successful show about the modern history of video game business. Blake is incredibly insightful about how his content and investing career inform one another, but he's also keenly attuned to the potent future and dynamics of creator business models. Blake is candid and generous with his advice, what turned out to be a masterclass for creators and business-minded operators alike. And now, my interview with Blake Robbins.
Blake, welcome to Media Empires. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you.
Blake, by way of introduction, I've shared a bit of your background, how you got started in VC working at Ludlow, how you invested in a number of companies and helped even incubate 100 Thieves, how you joined Benchmark recently. Why don't you give, by way of introduction, kind of the different phases of sort of your majors and minors in terms of investment themes or rabbit holes you've gone down. Give an introduction on the topics that you've been interested in, where you're interested now.
Yeah, it's a long winding road, to be honest, but I swear there's a connection or a little bit of a through line. And mainly, I entered venture right out of college, and which is rare in its own right. But I ended up at Ludlow, and we were all based in Detroit, doing investing mainly on the coast. And I realized pretty quickly that in order to break through the noise or build a brand of any sort where people would think of me, I had to be more public online. And so that was my first step, which was just tweeting my thoughts out on Twitter, and mainly just tweeting into the abyss, like
into the void.
Yeah, and just sort of just like throwing myself into conversations that I had no right to be a part of, but I just sort of acted like I belonged, and eventually people paid attention. But pretty wild, because there's no reason why people should have been paying attention to what I was saying. Like at the time, I was just randomly putting my thoughts out there, and eventually people realized. And one of the first areas where like I realized that I had a unique perspective was around gaming and specifically esports, and that I used to play, and I still play way too many games, but I used to play Call of Duty, like not semi-professionally, but I played pretty high level of Call of Duty when I was in high school. And there's sort of all these weird paths of my life, which is gaming was one part of my life, and then business and venture capital and that whole world is a whole other aspect. And gaming for me was this hobby that I thought I was going to pursue as my like dream job. I thought I was going to go pro in Call of Duty, and I remember telling my parents I was going to go pro, and they're like, no shot, that's not a thing. And to their credit, it probably wasn't a thing, and it wasn't realistic for me. But I sort of just was obsessed with that world. I gave up on that dream pretty quickly once I got to like my junior year of high school, and then I very quickly realized once I got into venture capital, people were talking about it. They were talking about esports as a thing, competitive gaming, streamers, all that stuff, and I was like, this is bizarre. Like I still am very obsessed with this world. There's all these VCs talking about it like they understand this world, but like I live and breathe this world still as a fan. And so I started to write about that and talk a lot more about that. And through that, eventually ended up incubating, an esports team and sort of media company called 100 Thieves. Which was actually a former Call of Duty pro that I was a fan of growing up, and so I reached up to him and sort of convinced him that like he should be building a business around himself. And then what that eventually opened up is the Pandora's box of like creators and that whole world. And specifically around that time, this is probably 5-ish years ago, maybe 6 years ago at that time, I became really obsessed with this idea of like, if you have distribution, what can you like, you get to ask like this really interesting question of like, what can you build that's really authentic to your audience? And that's like the complete opposite problem of everything that you and I know from the startup world, which is like always looking for the problem to be solving and try, how do you get those early customers? But like in this case, these creators have already built out their niche or their audience, and as long as they're being authentic, they can in theory sell or build something that is really authentic to their audience. And 100 Thieves was a good example of, okay, people really were rooting for Nate Schott, the CEO, to do this because it was a perfect extension of his career and his brand and what he was doing. He was really unique on his own, that he was trying to build something bigger than himself. It was sort of the first time that my eyes were open of what can you do when you build something bigger than yourself and leverage the audience and distribution that you've built. And so spend a lot of time in creators and then still spend a lot of time in gaming. But the real truth is like the number of investments I've made at Ludlow are just this wide range of consumer and enterprise. But those are the areas that I think I have the most unique perspective or voice on. And so that's where I've really leaned into publicly, at least.
Yeah. And I'm curious, in your capacity at Benchmark, in 2023, where you're looking, because I doubt you guys are going to do another esports team, though that could be wrong. And I doubt that you're going to invest in creators directly, though I want to get to that in a bit. And the creator kind of economy startups like had some hype around them, and maybe that hype has decreased a little bit. And even esports was a bit hypier a few years ago. Feel free to react to those characterization. And I'm curious where you're looking now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think what I've learned and grown a lot as an investor over the past, 7 years, in that, I've gone really deep on these what I would consider really niche areas, and I've watched sort of firsthand the hype cycles that emerge. It's people become sheep pretty quickly of like, this is the next big thing. This is way bigger than it's going to than what it realistically is. I think I've approached like esports and creators with a fairly realistic view of the markets. Like in the creator space, I probably only have 1 or 2 investments in esports, and those are very specific theses that have lined up. And I think at Benchmark, the view is what's really changed for me, and I've been here now close to a year, is really just thinking about like how big can these get, and a lot of it's market timing as well, of just thinking about like what's uniquely enabling this and why is this going to be so massive. And so trying to think just on a larger scale. And for me, I spend a lot of my time in consumer pretty broadly. I think early stage investing is hard enough as it is. And you talk to anyone in 2023 and say you're doing consumer investing, and they sort of are like, what are you doing? Yeah. Consumer investing is like dead, or it's impossible. And I sort of just view it as like, no, it's really exciting. And there's all these new areas that are emerging, but it's much more of, I don't pigeonhole myself into like one specific thesis at any given time, and try and keep a super open mind.
Totally. I want to go deep on creators in this episode. There was the famous Amjad tweet that I saw you quote tweeted as well. For the first time in history, it's become easier to turn attention into capital than capital into attention. And I want us to unpack it. And I'll start by sort of, doing the straw man version of it, which is, hey, Mr. Beast built a $100 million or whatever it is, burger business in the last year. Take every creator that has some niche interest or audience or expertise, and boom, they'll just build the definitive product in that space because people want to buy from brands and individuals instead of kind of faceless corporations. Put some meat on those bones of the Amjad quote. What can we expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes back to just relatability. And there's probably an important distinction that needs to be made, which is like there's different types of creators, and that like a Mr. Beast is in his own world, and that he's playing almost like a reach game of how do I reach hundreds of millions of people. And the reality is like most creators can't do that. And there's this really tough challenge that you have as a creator, which is at some point you sort of have to come to terms that you might not be the next Mr. Beast, unless that is the game that you've set out to play. But most of them are like, nope, I should be thinking about my like smaller audience size and really just focus on cultivating that and building a real relationship with my fans. And so I think that's sort of the first part. But the other part is like, when you are a smaller creator, like, not a Mr. Beast, and when I say small, like that could still be someone with 5 to 10 million followers, relative to a Mr. Beast who has, over 100 million, you need to really figure out what it is that, like, why people are watching you. If I ask you what product should you be selling or making or doing, if you can't answer that, you probably don't really have a moat as a creator, and that's a really bad sign because it just means you're just doing like whatever is hype at the time and following that through line, which is just not sustainable. And so instead, you should think about, okay, you make amazing real estate videos. What can you build around that? I can build a real estate company. Maybe I can build a smaller Zillow. Right now, we're in the phase of mass accumulation of distribution and audience, but we haven't fully transitioned to like, okay, now I should be building products and building services for them. I sort of view it as it's all just like a funnel where like everyone is going, initially they start on TikTok or Instagram or maybe YouTube, but probably not YouTube, but all roads like eventually lead to YouTube because that's just the best monetization. After that, it's like launch a course or launch merch. Those are, again, the low-hanging fruit. But like where this gets really interesting is when they start to build real software products that can scale. And what I have fun thinking about is what are like the highest customer acquisition cost areas of the internet? And can you build a niche that's like you're a TikToker that is an expert in personal injury lawyers? And so instead of thinking of whatever the random billboard in your town, it's like, no, this person's like the expert. And they told me if I ever get into a car accident, I like should be thinking about these 4 steps. And it's like, if you can do that, then those ads cost so much money on Google or Facebook, and you just completely arbitrage that. And assuming they are actual experts, then it's a no-brainer to be connecting with their audience.
So do you think the way it's going to play out is there will be leaders across every niche, and then those leaders will either partner with like tech CEOs, and they'll be like a founding influencer in the way that there was like a founding engineer, or they might partner with like agencies that spring up that are like COO in a box or something. How do you see this playing out? Like imagine, fast forward to all the audiences are built.
It all comes back to like ambition. It's not the same as like a software engineer per se, because like a software engineer, sure, they could hack on side projects and make a good living. But like here, like these creators already have like a really great living, assuming they've built an audience. Again, like if you built it on TikTok, maybe your monetization isn't as amazing if you went, on YouTube. But like, let's assume they're making $1 million plus a year on YouTube. It is a really tough pitch to be like, hey, you should probably just go and like build a business around yourself. And they're like, I already have a business around myself. Like I'm already making $1 million a year. Like why do I need to do anything more? And I think it does take a really special person to like sort of reflect and be like, oh, like I can actually do something much bigger here. And so I think what needs to happen is you need like the 100 Thieves stories to be successful in order for creators to open their eyes and be like, oh wait, I should want to build something bigger than myself, or there is something more interesting than just building something for myself. And like Nate Shot had this line early on when he was pitching 100 Thieves, which was, he could sell just t-shirts that say Nate Shot on it, and he was like, but that's not like fulfilling or interesting. And it's way more interesting to build a brand. We're finally going to enter that stage. And I guess maybe to answer your question more directly of like how this plays out, I think you're going to have a few in certain categories just like really dominate in terms of like their ambition. A good example is there's a company, I don't know if you've come across it, called carsandbids.com. Have you come across this one at all? It's an auto YouTuber. His name's Doug DeMuro, and he does basically just car reviews, and that's all his content is. And he launched basically a Bring a Trailer competitor, if you're familiar with that business. Bring a Trailer is like this online auction house. Think like eBay Motors type of thing for used cars. You just show up at that person's house and like you bring your own trailer or you drive that car off the lot. It's basically just peer-to-peer auction house. And this creator just realized there was an opportunity of like he has distribution. He should be able to like launch it on his own. And if you just do the math, they showed the past auctions. It's like he's probably doing 60, 70K GMV a day. It's pretty wild. And I think that's where we're heading, is like the ones who think about what software products they can build. Like I've always joked with Mr. Beast and his team, like they should consider building a bank, because that's like the sort of holy grail area of a high CAC industry, and his audience is around like money and giving away money. Or like, can you build a Cash App competitor? There's certain these things where if you have the distribution, where do you take that? And that's where I think we're going to just see some real giants emerge. There there is also potentially the play of what you're talking about, where maybe it's them all banding together, like maybe all the auto influencers come together and they just like sign to, Cars and Bids with Doug DeMuro, and it's like they're part of that team. I think we're in the first step of it all, but the real answer is like creators sort of care about like two things, and it's like making more money and being more famous. And so like if you can help with either of those, it becomes a very compelling pitch to them.
Them banding together is like the title for X, like the Jay-Z. Yeah, fascinating. So it's interesting. Let's say we're talking about, super ambitious creators here. There's more ways to monetize than meets the eye, right? Mr. Beast not only has his, Feastables, but also a venture fund and an incubator and other business lines that leverage his audience. You can imagine, going back to our, real estate person, they not only build the local Zillow, but maybe, a fifth wall real estate venture firm, makes them a venture partner, in exchange for kind of sharing their audience. And so I'm curious, like how say more about the monetization angle when people build a niche. Like building products for their audience is one, but what other kind of monetization angles should they think about? There's always the question with Mr. Beast and others of like, how wide do you go? But what I understand about his model is he's really just able to like get leverage on his audience and bring in outside people who recognize the power of his distribution, are willing to give ownership or upside in exchange for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as like a creator, it really just depends. Like, I think investing is one angle for sure. Initially, I used to be like, oh yeah, like you can leverage this to get this like into any seed round you want, or maybe you can get advisor shares, whatever it might be. And I think my view has sort of changed in the like where they're best. Like where a creator is best suited to invest is probably like growth stage. And like once you have product market fit, like that's probably the more interesting arbitrage is like, hey, do you want me to be the face of your organization, right? Like, do you want me to sign a deal with you and let me invest X amount? You can imagine you do some deal with a growth stage fund that really does like want to put $70 million to work into a company. They can't get that access unless you have a Mr. Beast, for example. And so like, can you do a crazy SPV where, basically it's Mr. Beast leading it, and as part of that, there's some in like deal that he has to do a certain number of promotions or whatever that might be. But like when it's de-risked, because like a lot of creators they struggle with this whole stance of like, if I'm putting my name on this at a seed stage or even an A or a pre-seed, they're all just sort of like, I should be getting 50% of this company. Like they don't understand the value of equity in the way that you and I do, where it's like 1% is a lot of a company. But to someone who's like understandably has a huge audience, and they're like, if I'm going to co-sign this, it make me a co-founder. And so like, I think that will always be a struggle. And I suspect this has always been a struggle, even with like traditional Hollywood of like, you want, I don't know, like Tom Cruise to invest. Like he's probably like, what? Like I'll put my name, on the thing for a small check. But like, if you actually want to use me in any way as like a promotional material, like I need to own a huge chunk of this business. And so my guess is that like, that's the more interesting angle, is like the growth stage when you've already found product market fit, when the marketing actually can make sense. Like you don't want to necessarily channel Mr. Beast into your startup and announcing he's tied to your startup when you don't even have any real clear signs of product market fit. And so that's one piece of it. But investing is sort of like the natural evolution that we've seen. The Packies of the world do, or the Lennys do, makes a ton of sense. But I think it's always going to come back to like job boards. It's going to come back to like they have. In a Mr. Beast case, like I think of the Cash Apps, or like and maybe there's probably a bigger learning within this of like, if look at the companies that are sponsoring you and understand why they're sponsoring you and realize that like, even if they're paying you $1 million, that probably means they think they're going to get $2 to $5 million in return, and so why do they think that? And is there an opportunity for you to actually build within that space? And for most creators, that's pretty like moot and irrelevant. But for certain ones, if a lawyer, like a law firm, is approaching you and you're like this personal injury lawyer on TikTok, like you should really consider like, oh wait, no, should I be going after this instead?
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, in the spirit of thinking big, like a Cash App, I mean, should Mr. Beast try to compete with YouTube? I know it's a big question. Sometimes I ask, should LeBron build a new NBA, the title approach so they can like get some ownership in it? John Shahidi, Justin Bieber's friend, tried with Bieber support a few years ago, and it didn't quite work. Maybe it would have, had a better chance today, or different implementation. Or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, what I've learned, and this is just from watching like Twitch a lot, right? And I spend way too much time watching Twitch, probably more than the average VC. But like when you look at it, a couple of years ago, you had the big streamers leave, like the Ninjas, and I don't know. There's so many streamers that have left to YouTube and Facebook at this point. Well, Facebook's winded down their whole side, but there was still periods in time where you had huge, like the biggest creators on Twitch leave and go to some other platform. And the reality is, like, yes, they took some percentage of their audience and whatever else, but like what Twitch, and this might be specific to Twitch, is like Twitch organizes their product almost like it's a leaderboard. And so when you go to the browse tab, it will show like the top streamers at any given point. And if that's your behavior as a user, is to like go to the browse tab, click on the game of your choice, and then watch the top streamer at that time, what ends up happening is like you just make another person. And so like instead of everyone going and leaving to watch that other creator, it just made some other creator the biggest star at that time. I think there are specific creators that like but there's probably like one every year maybe that has the power to really like go and demand their audience to go elsewhere. The built-in distribution that you have and network effects you have is really hard to topple. Like I would wish them all the best. I've always said, like, if you were Ninja and instead of signing with Mixer, the more ambitious thing would have been to just like launch ninja.tv and like you go that route. And even if you make, like $2 million a year on there, at least you're keeping the whole cut, rather than somewhere else. And so that's the risk they all run with. But again, most of them actually care much more about being famous than even the money. And so the only reason they're going to give up the fame aspect is if they get a guarantee, like a Facebook gives Ninja a massive deal and they're like, okay, yeah, fine, I'll do it. And so you could probably convince LeBron to do something like you're saying if you give him enough money. Otherwise, like there still is ego and fame. Like he wants to win, the NBA championship for a reason, and that matters to him probably more than any money at any given point.
You can imagine some vehicle is created and funded to go to LeBron and 15 of the best basketball players or the best YouTubers, just kind of like the bundle of what you're talking about, saying, hey, we're going to do a new thing. It only works if we all do it you're all going to get upside in it, and you're all going to get, a guaranteed massive, upfront payment. Investors in that vehicle could still make a lot of money if this thing becomes close to the next, next YouTuber, next NBA. But yeah, fascinating.
I think the thing I struggle with that is there is still so much key man risk within it. And so like you need to, it's like a, I don't know, part one, part two business where it's like part one, you're going to get everyone to come over because you're LeBron, you launched a new basketball league. But then it's like, wait, how do you actually keep people staying to watch, the other people that you got there? And that's where I sort of struggle with it. But there's like an interesting example on Twitch that's happened recently where one of the biggest gambling streamers left and started his own gambling streaming site because gambling got banned on Twitch. And so like that could make sense. When things get banned on Twitch, like that probably creates an opening, but there is probably reasons and good reasons of why those things get banned. And so, but this creator probably does have people that will follow him to the other place, and maybe you create a verticalized streaming platform at that point. But I'm a little bit skeptical, like that there's more than a handful that can really do it. What the one interesting example that like we've seen, which is like when Barstool, what I've seen with like Barstool Sports and what they've tried to do around almost creating like a new type of UFC where they like created their own boxing league. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you can imagine they do, like they can create new sports. Like they should do like a cornhole league, like there's all, or like a flip cup league, like that stuff can happen. I think that's another variation of like, if you have a really strong niche audience, you can create new sports or new media properties.
Like over time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The media company, the basketball media company, creating leagues, that's fascinating. I wrote a post on whoever generates the demand captures the value, or will over time, and markets probably will become more efficient. And it's interesting to see in spaces where they've become more efficient. Maybe tech is one of them in terms of at least founders creating most of the upside. You could argue that actually, like, you can imagine a few man developer team banding together and saying, hey, we're going to co-found startups for 50% and distribute among us three as maybe a more efficient way to get upside, because the difference between first employee and co-founder is just so massive. Anyways, tech is more efficient than something like music, perhaps, where the record label owns most of it. And even sports, right? Like, they get paid a lot of money, but they, the owners make a lot of money as well. And who's creating the real value, or who's more replaceable? It's interesting to see how industries will kind of reorganize over time, the compensation as it relates to value capture.
Yeah, there's just a bit of a disconnect within the creator world from tech right now, in that in a lot of these cases, like, the creators, and understandably, like, the creators are skeptical of, like, people that reach out to them and say, like, I want to build something for you, because most of the time it is like this shady person who hasn't built a startup, but instead just sees, like, oh, I can leverage your audience in this, like, really just quick way to make a quick buck. And where I hope things go is you do have, like, really talented dev shops, that emerge, and it's like, let me just spin up this incubator of, like, hey, I know what you can do. I know your audience. Let me build, this hyper-focused Zillow in your area. And let's think about that as a business model. But I think there might also be, at some point, just like the business in a box, models that we saw back in the day. Like, you might just see a lot of that emerge, where it's like, who cares whether it's the same, product over and over again, but if it's reskinned into their audience, like, that's another way to do it.
Like a credit card or a consumer product or something. Yeah. Fascinating. Let's talk about the financing ecosystem for creators, and maybe I'll do the analogs to VCs, right? Like Mr. Beast, raising at 1.5 or whatever. Maybe that's like Stripe raising at 100. Then there's what Slow Ventures is doing, putting $1 million into creators for 5% of their earnings over the next 30 years, or sometimes 2 million. I'm speaking kind of generally, but and maybe that's like Series A investing or something. And then, I wonder if there's some, something that's even like pre-seed or YC for. And I know you've thought about that space a lot. So why don't you talk about the funding ecosystem and where you think it's going?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it briefly, of just like, there is some creators out there right now that have taken funding for their businesses. I think in most of those cases, they are a little bit more established. The piece that I struggle with, and I've thought a lot about, like, what does it look like to spin up a YC for creators, and the reality is, like, there is some precedent of what this model looks like in this space with, like, content houses, and specifically, like, you see when content houses emerge, like a Hype House or a Team 10. They all band together, they all get together, and it's like, they realize that when they're all together, they can all become more famous. And so when you're in a house with Charlie D'Amelio or one of these people, just by association, you're going to become more famous. That makes sense. What ends up, like, happening, though, is the people that win, and, like, really win, they get lawyers and they figure out ways to get out of those deals, and, like, and it sort of just crumbles and breaks. And so the only way, or, like, in a Team 10 example, you have creators that get famous, and probably do get famous purely because of Jake Paul and the people in that house. But, like, they get so famous that people, like, and this is probably the downside of investing in creators, is, like, the creator, like, if you don't have an voice yourself as, like, the face of YC, like, if you don't have a Paul Graham for creators, like, you basically need a Casey Neistat or someone to run this who's willing to, I wouldn't say go to war. It's much more of, like, defend themselves when someone comes back and they're like, hey, I signed a really bad deal. They're trying to take 10% of my equity, or, like, my earnings forever. And you basically need the proof points of, like, no, I made you famous. And there's so many examples that have happened in the creator space. Like, one of the bigger ones was a streamer named Tfue signed a deal with FaZe Clan. Signed with FaZe Clan when he was really tiny at the time. He was undiscovered and ended up becoming basically ninja level. And at some point, Tfue leaked his contract, and that basically got him out of his deal, because the hate was so strong of, like, oh wow, like, I can't believe FaZe Clan's holding him to this deal. And it's not like the difference that you see in the music industry is like they are like the labels, you still see it every now and then. Like there are certain people that do it, but like the labels, they hold a closer like reins of like, we need this, we need to do this because the model doesn't work otherwise. I don't know if you have that same argument in the creator space where like there's tons of people that can make a great lifestyle business without doing that deal. And so you need to make it so tangible and so clear of what the benefits are. And it probably needs to tie into something like a content house, where it's like you all living in that house, getting started together does like show, okay, someone's going to become famous out of this. But again, if one of those hits, you are going to have like all these lawyers come down and be like, no, sorry, they're signing with UTA now. Like we're clearing up all those deals though.
I have an idea for that, which is for any investment that the fund makes, they do a RUV or something like that for a lot of their fans. It's almost like what we're seeing with Logan Paul, right? There's some NFT scandal where he solicited some money for NFTs and it got rug pulled or nothing ended up getting shipped. And if that was like a faceless record label, maybe he would be blaming the record label and might have sympathy of the fans. But because it's the fans themselves, he's been villainized, and appropriately so, it seems. So you could imagine a world where now instead of just this corporation, it's this corporation and fans who are saying, hey, we made you famous.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that is like one real way to solve it. The pieces that like, which Logan, I guess, didn't fully think through here, is that a lot of creators are hyper aware of like, I don't want to bring my fans into this because I don't want them to like basically do that. Like they don't want to expose them to more risks than they need to. And I think that's smart for some creators. And like if you have the pull, but like there is like,
it's skin in the game though.
Yeah, there is something around it. I think about it a lot in like the crypto context of like, can you financially incentivize someone to become famous in theory? Like, can you king make based off of like just having upside in their career? And like if you get rewarded for promoting BTS music, like the early stands of BTS or Bieber, like they probably should get something because like they were a real army and they really did go out there in the world. So I think about that a lot. I don't know what the perfect model is, but someone will solve it. But I think it does need to come from a big creator themselves, and it's almost like the father figure of the space or mother figure of the space, like a Casey Neistat or Liza Koshy or someone like that, who has a lot of the trust and respect of the the rising creators. Where like, wow, I'm going to get co-signed by Casey or Liza, and that will help them actually build out their career.
If you couldn't be at Benchmark anymore, or even couldn't be an early stage venture or just venture, might you build a YC for creators or do something in the creator financing space? Or do you think it's too hard or too early or just not the right business?
I mean, I think my interests, like if I wasn't doing venture capital, like the area that I spend the most time in is like this niche, niche internet stuff, and what can happen when you do marry like the creator with distribution or a community with distribution with a great product. And I think there is real like probably private equity returns of like, can you just do a roll up of these things and like buy, an interesting software business that's like, like a SaaS tool that you pair with like the landscaping influencer, and it's like, cool, now you like launched like the biggest vertical SaaS landscaping products like on day one. I think there's for sure like that arbitrage. And so I think a lot about that as like, if there like, if there was a world where I needed to do that instead, and I couldn't do venture capital, I think it would be around just like the arbitrage around distribution and something around that thesis.
Fascinating. There's a question of like, would they benefit from being in a cohort with each other? And what YC gets is they get special economics and scale. Like it's the best model in venture, or it's one of them, right? Like you can't lose. And so I'm curious if that exists on the creator side, or it's like the things that make it unique on startups or YC are actually just unique to startups.
I think there's different dynamics in the creator space, which is like, in theory, you being in a group or a cohort with all these people who are equally ambitious and equally successful, in theory, it should just make you all more successful in rising tides, type of scenario. But I do think like talking to a landscaping, influencer talking to a like Mr. Beast type creator probably isn't going to like, it probably will learn from a Mr. Beast type creator, but Mr. Beast type creator probably won't learn from the landscaping one. And so how do you make sure there is the win-win overall is probably the bigger question that I would set out for. But I do think it's like helping with editing. It's, understanding the algorithm, quote unquote. Like there is basic stuff that for sure all these people can go through. And like, can you create a really small cohort or class that like you all come together, someone takes 5% of your earnings moving forward, you get the cosign, they all collaborate, that type of stuff. I think that can't happen. But again, I think it's going to be sort of self-selecting. Like, I don't know if the best creators want to opt into that because they're just like, I can just grind for 3 months and hopefully that will push me through the breakthrough. And the reality is like that might actually be true. And so it is different than what we see in YC, where it's like, it's not tricks of the trade, but it is like way more of a grind, and you don't get the same like dopamine hits of like, oh, I'm actually like making real progress in building a startup early on. Like you might have some signs of, oh, I got my first customer, but like it's way more of a slog than in my opinion, like a creator who they can have a viral video and be like, oh, I'm onto something. I need to like actually continue to just keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in terms of the differences between the two. Shifting gears a bit, I want to situate us in the creator economy a bit in terms of the past and the future. And I'll get at that by asking the question of, pretend it's 2028 and we're having another podcast and we're kind of like talking about the different waves of the creator economy over the past 15 years or however long. I don't even know when the creator economy like officially begins, but when you talk about like, what are the different waves and so part of that is asking about the past leading up to now, and then now leading up to say 5 years from now, where we think it might go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right now there's like the pre-TikTok era, which was, I don't know, let's just call it like the YouTube dominated era. And that all was just around like sort of just find your audience, build your niche, leverage YouTube's algorithms in some ways. And, like my view is like YouTube is this weird product that like wasn't really made for the individual, but ended up really becoming a great product market fit for the individual videos. But like, it feels like early on the focus was more of like, how do we get the ESPNs of the world to like upload their clips? And by focusing is a weird example of like they focused on the ESPNs of the world and how they can get them to post their clips. They had to figure out the advertising problem, which ended up being like a great fit for individual creators, right? Like it turns out, probably to ESPN when they upload their clips, or the Vivos of the world, like in their music videos, like, yeah, I made I don't know, $20,000 or something. Like they're not actually that happy. But when you flip that to like a creator, it's like, oh wait, I just got paid $20,000 this month for making a video. Like, sweet, yes, like I love that. And so that's sort of that first era, and you had a lot of like, I don't know, creators that dominated that era. But it was still, and it still exists to this day, way more of fine tuning to the algorithm, I think, than ever before, of just like average view duration matters more than anything else. Click-through rate on your thumbnails matter more than anything else. And Mr. Beast in a lot of ways is like the algorithm perfected. Like you look at his thumbnails and his titles and it's like, it's borderline clickbait, but not actually clickbait because it's real, which is why it makes it even more insane. And then the videos like are almost edited to retain, right? Like it's like this fine-tuned product of how do we make sure they stay for the full 10 minutes? And even the 10-minute decision that YouTube decided that you get more ads, mid-roll ads, if you do a 10-minute video. So everyone now, the meta changes, when that rolls out, and every video is at least 10 minutes, from a serious creator. So like that's the era that we were in. TikTok sort of blows that all up, and they're like, cool, anyone can become famous. You don't need to have the editors anymore. You don't need to think about the algorithm as much. I think of TikTok almost as a giant talent show, and like your previous success on a video helps a little bit, but not really. Like you're still only as good as your next video. And again, there's still some algorithm tweaking around that and building their audience. But we started to see like like I guess the larger thing that's within all of that is like, of course, all roads lead to YouTube for those people on TikTok or Instagram. If they blow up, they all end up just posting on YouTube because the monetization is the best. But the piece that I guess I think where it's all heading is like right now, like I actually just don't think advertising is the best business model for a lot of creators. And what happens, and you see it on Instagram, like when they announce like, oh, we're actually going to move fully into the Reels product and we're going to kill like, the photos aspect. Like that happens because the incentive model of we're an ads driven business. And if we can't do like the ad targeting that we used to, we now need to do it on your overall interests and go to the interest graph rather than the social graph. That forces them to be like, hey, we're going to roll out this other change. Obviously, it sort of gets just absolutely destroyed by the public. But that is like why that decision gets made, is the incentives of the platforms become sort of in direct conflict with the creators themselves. And you see it a little bit right now where like YouTube just rolled out a change where if you use any swear words within the first 15 seconds of your video, it actually gets demonetized and they can't run ads on it anymore. They ran that like historically. And so you have entire people's catalogs, hundreds of videos that they've made over the past decade that actually now will never make more money because they like swore in a video. And so my view is that like, I don't think it's necessarily crypto. Like I think that's the extreme end of it, but I do think there's going to be more and more of, I want to own my audience in some way. And so you have the Substacks of the world emerge, but I think we're going to get even further in like, how do I have a direct line of communication with my fans? And what I think is like, OnlyFans is a crazy business, and that like OnlyFans is in theory, OnlyFans and Twitch and Substack, they all are this like fully aligned business model with their creators, in that like they only make money when their creators make money, and like it is much more of enabling the fan interaction, and that's what they're monetizing rather than relying on the pure ads based model. And Twitch has a whole bunch of random quirks within that, but I do think we're going to move more and more into like actually monetize through your fans, build relationships with your fans. Sort of maybe the best way to describe it is like right now we're in like the broadcast era of like try and build a massive audience, and we're going to move more and more towards like the relationship era and try and build real true, not just fandoms, but like actual relationships with your fans.
That's a fascinating overview. Let's say more about what it means for platforms going forward. Like which platforms are going to have more power in the future, which platforms are going to have less power in the future. Is it harder, for example, is it going to be harder to build an audience on YouTube than it has been historically? Like where should creators go? Depending on which ones it's easier to build an audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it always comes back to like, if you are a creator, and this is the curse, is like, initially you're going to just go to the platform where you think you can get your first 10,000 fans, and that is probably TikTok today. And so you're going to go there, you're going to build your audience, and then like you actually, if you wanted, like there's moments over the past couple of years where it's like TikTok's getting banned, and then like you see them all be like, please follow me on these other platforms, please go to these other places, like and that's just going to continue to happen. Like that's like we're just going to have more and more of like we're so close to like those moments of everything getting blown up. You see it even with Twitter, right? Like of, oh wait, like Elon Twitter's dead, follow me on Mastodon, like subscribe to my Substack, whatever that is. And you also see Twitter respond and be like, hey, actually if you post those other links, we're going to ban you. And I think it's just a good subtle, and maybe some cases not so subtle, reminder of like you are building on like rented land in a lot of these cases. And so it's more of you need like a true shakeup. Like you need those moments of like TikTok getting banned in theory for everyone to realize like, wait, there actually is real power in like having a direct line of communication. And I think like community.com or Substack or some of these touch on it a little bit, but like how does that evolve, and how do you like really get it closer to I just have a direct line of communication with my fans? Like it sort of blows my mind that like if you went to, I don't know, a creator with 10 million subscribers and you're like, can you tell me about your audience? And they're like, here's what my YouTube analytics says, and it's like podcast says that it's 95% male, and they're like maybe 18 to 30, and like that's about it. And like that is pretty insane. And especially if you're like I guess maybe even crazier is if you are a YouTuber and tomorrow you decide I'm going to like stream on Twitch, There's a whole bunch of people that like would never even know that you're live on Twitch, which is just crazy. And they might be live on Twitch every single day for 10 hours. And I laugh at this because a lot of Twitch streamers will post their videos on like their highlights on their YouTube channel. And it's like there's people that probably think of Ninja as a YouTuber rather than a streamer because they're only seeing his videos. And that is just crazy. Like the fact that that's not all connected and it's not easier to be like, hey, I'm actually going live, pay attention to me here. I just think there's something around the notification sort of element or direct line of fan communication that will evolve over time.
Yeah, no, great point. I mean, I remember when Ryan Leslie was doing Superphone. I'm surprised iMessage, and maybe community's trying to do this, I'm not sure, but I'm surprised, like direct SMS hasn't been, the platform where people can reach out to people and have CRMs around that. Cause yeah.
The current approaches have really walked a thin line of, hey, like get direct messages from me, and sort of seem like you're getting text messages from them. And like on some level you are, but like it's basically just like a Twilio setup, right? Like it's no different than you and I just typing into like a Twilio prompt and being like, hey, send a message with your one-time password. I think that there's a communication piece that needs to be fixed there, which is just like, no, just like follow me here and get subscribed. Like this is no different than a follow. Like don't actually think of this as like Erik sending me a text message because that's just not right. And like as a fan, you would understandably get upset and be like, wait, that actually wasn't Erik typing me. Like, that was a
Chat
fan.
GPT.
Like Chat GPT. Yeah, like it's like you put up like a Zapier trigger to be like when he's live, sending a text message like, hey everyone, like I'm live. And it's like, oh, like just right, like Erik is now live on Twitch. Like that's fine. And so I think that's where like we sort of went on a detour within the space of making it seem like it is really directly fan relationships or like direct creator to fan relationship. And I think there is sort of better ways that over time we've now learned to communicate that.
That makes a lot of sense. But going back to the creator, themselves, when you talk to a number of creators who are, let's say they're multi-talented, they're good at everything, and they're wondering, hey, where should I really invest in building my audience? Like first, like, or how should I think about sequencing? Like, is it TikTok, then YouTube, or is it some other combination? Like, or how do I think about Insta? Like, how do you advise?
I think it really comes down to just like, what do you actually have fun doing, right? Like if you're a filmmaker, for sure, YouTube, like, but if you are someone who's just great on camera and can talk to a camera for hours, go on Twitch or TikTok. Like Twitch and live streaming, which we've touched on briefly, is just a whole other beast of this industry where it's a very different skill set than making YouTube videos or making TikToks. And I think that like TikTok is the lowest friction or lowest lift, but it also is like in theory the cheapest. Like if you were doing like a currency exchange of like one follower on TikTok to a subscriber on YouTube, like it would not be 1 for 1. It would be like maybe like 10, like 0.1 of a follower on TikTok is to 1 subscriber on YouTube. And so I think that's just another piece that like creators need to remind themselves and not sort of get fooled by that. Like having 100,000 subscribers on YouTube is far more valuable than probably almost any other platform.
Talk about live streaming for a second. What makes it so different, or what is the skill sets that's needed, and why is it valuable? Because I hadn't even had that in my like calculus of platforms to really build on to build a business on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like Twitch is the most direct to fan relationship in theory, because you're sitting staring at your screen for 8 hours straight. You're probably playing a game, but a lot of the biggest streamers right now aren't playing games. Instead, they're doing React type content of watching a YouTube video that someone sends in from their chat or something like that. And that's a different skill because you're like basically, it's like crowd control, right? You're like managing, 20,000 people watching you, and how do you keep that entertaining is very different than like even this, where we can go back and we can edit it and we can tweak it the way that we want to, versus like you're just alive, like you're just there, and you're like, how do I keep these people interested for the next 8 hours? And some people are amazing at it, and some like, so there's probably 2 different types of streamers. One is like they're really entertaining because they know how to like manage their audience. And then there's the other, which is like they're just really good at the game that they're playing. And they're really good at the game you're playing. There's like maybe one per game, and like they have their little niche. But like where the real value is like they're entertainers, and ideally they're a mix of both. And so like Ninja isn't the best Fortnite player in the world, and he would tell you he's not the best Fortnite player in the world, but he's probably top 500, and at his prime he was probably top 100, but he was also really good at entertaining. And so that combo just completely lights everything on fire and like makes it way bigger. But it is really hard to manage a chat that's like scrolling by and reacting to you or saying something to you, and it's just a different skill. Like I respect those people, and it's also like the hardest, it's the most work in theory of any of the creator platforms, because like those people in theory could just go and create like a 10-minute video, upload that on YouTube, probably make that in maybe a day at most, and like get 1 million views, to use like the Mr. Beast analogy of like, or like what he says of, make one video that gets 10 million views or 100 million views instead of 1,000 videos that get however many, like 1 million views. And so he's like the perfect example of like the counter example of why you wouldn't stream. But for streaming, like the reason why it's so interesting is you get to like people go on your journey, right? Like they're watching you go from 10 subscribers to millions of subscribers, and you get to make people mods in your chat. You get to show that you're like, you've been there for a year. There is status of like, oh, when I jump into someone's stream, if I've been subscribed to them for a while, it shows that I've been subscribed to them for a while, and they're going to acknowledge, oh, thanks for being here for 3 years. And that it's sort of like Cameo on steroids on some level, because when you write in a message, they'll respond to it and acknowledge it. And so there's all these different nuances of Twitch or live streaming than just pure YouTube or the standard content creation that we think of.
Yeah. And how much of it is expanded beyond gaming? Are we going to see verticals for different platforms, or will it live on Twitch? Or
yeah, I mean, it's slowly for sure starting to expand outside of gaming. Like the main, actually, this is probably a flaw within Twitch's categorization, but the way like Twitch categorizes things is based off of really just like games or not games. And they threw a bucket together called just chatting, which is basically just this, like you and I just chatting to a camera. And that is by far the fastest growing category of Twitch right now. And at any given point, it's probably number one on Twitch. And that is because people have figured out how to be more entertaining talking to their camera. And it turns out when you're like, instead of playing the game and you're actually chatting with your chat, like in the people watching, that's actually really engaging and builds a real relationship with your fans. And so that's the area that's probably growing the fastest. And you're starting to see people do cooking streams. You're starting to see people do like music streams. All of that I think will emerge. And I think Twitch is successfully grown out of like their actual pure game mode at this point.
Yeah, very interesting to watch how that plays out. You're someone who understands the power of distribution very intrinsically, and you genuinely love this world. We've talked about this at lunch, and I'm curious to pick up that conversation. Is like, but you haven't chosen to go all in on being a creator yourself, in addition to being a VC. And there's a number of people, who also are thinking like, hey, should I really like do this? I get it. I like it. How have you thought about it for yourself? And it might help other people think about it for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think my view is like when you study this space enough, you learn like what, I wouldn't say tricks, but more of like the techniques that it takes to like go viral, quote unquote, and play the algorithm game. In theory, I could tell you how to get a tweet to do pretty well on Twitter, assuming you have some base level audience. And I've been really hyper aware that like I don't want to do that. Instead, I care much more about like cultivating my like group of people that follow me because I just like them. I focus way more on quality rather than quantity. And I think a lot of people in our world sort of just like jump, especially like in the business world, sort of be like, oh, I can get to 1 million followers, I should go and try to get to 1 million followers. And that's just a different job than what I would want to be doing. It's a different game. It's a different audience. And instead I care about like, no, I'd much rather like a really important person that I respect, follow me for whatever my insights are, rather than like, oh, like let's get another 10,000 people that don't really add value. And there's some learnings within it, which is like when I've gone deep on certain pockets, like depending on the journey that people have followed me through, right? Like if they followed me when I was doing like talking a lot about esports or talking a lot about creators or gaming or crypto, whatever it might be, there is like a little bit of how do you make sure that someone's actually following you for you rather than like, oh, he's an expert in this niche. And so I'm trying to like navigate that as well. And so in a perfect world, I actually like would rather just like make my account private and like just focus in on what I have. But I know there's tons of cons to doing that. But I do like, I know myself and I know that like I would not be a great, like public figure per se. Like, yeah, I don't want to have 1 million followers or anything like that. Like, that's not my decision. Or like that's not, and I do think it is a decision that you make as a creator, where you like have to lean in to what works. And I don't really want to play that game.
Yeah. Everyone has to figure out what game they want to play and what pros and cons that come with that. Gearing towards closing here, I want to ask the same question that I asked for creators, but more so from the VC perspective, the creator economy perspective, in that, let's say we're talking 2028 and we're reflecting on the last decade of investing in the creator economy. Either what were the waves or what were the things that got really big? Because a few years ago there's a lot of hype about it, and I don't think we've seen major successes, maybe some minor ones. And so maybe reflect on that, and then reflect on where it's going, and maybe bring up. You've had some fascinating conversations on Fred Ursum's podcast with Jesse Walden and Fred Ursum. We hinted a little bit at the NFT stuff. Maybe bring up like some opportunities you might see there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes back to like whatever is going to work in the space is really like they need to make a creator more famous or more money. And if you are not doing one of those things, like you're going to have a really tough uphill battle. And so like, that's the first part is like, if you're working on a company in this space and it's something peripheral, that like is not going to like immediately resonate with the creator, I would just say good luck. It's going to be a struggle. But what I think like, what I've talked about with Fred and Jesse on that podcast is like, there is going to be something around enabling fandom, and what you touched on a little bit of like just if you get them as stakeholders or bought in, is there something around like a full-time fan? And like that's a concept that I've always just been intrigued with, and even thinking about like a Twitch where someone's sitting there and actually moderating sort of like for public goods, like like for free and notoriety within their community. But like that person deserves to see some upside in theory of the success of the community and creator that they're helping. And so what I think is like the next generation of tools might look like is just like, how do you actually empower these fans to really be bought in as stakeholders and like make it so if I find the next Drake or the next Mr. Beast or whoever, maybe I don't have to put like real monetary gains up. It's much more of like I'm just like vouching for that person, and I acknowledge that like when I vouch for that person, and maybe this is an NFT or something like that, that will in theory go up in value if I believe in that person, and because it's just a status symbol of I was early, and in the same way that you and I might like want to collect an early vinyl of a favorite artist that we like, or tour merch from like the Beatles or something, like that has real value if you still have that. And I've thought a lot about what digital merch looks like, and tried to like really think about how that evolves. And I think we're getting closer and closer to it. So I think that's one area, but I do think the other area is how do you actually just like make them more money? Just like, is it the like fan monetization side? I think there's a lot of learnings from an OnlyFans that can be applied through everything else, and I think we're in the first inning of that. The other piece is like, how do you get more famous? I think, a lot of people look at it as like, how do you just increase reach? But I think there's another angle, which is just like, you can make a lot more people creators. And so that's probably pseudonymous type stuff or VTubing or those pieces where like I would probably never go live myself on Twitch, but maybe if there's some setup, I might go live. And when it's lower friction or lower risk in theory, I think a lot about that as well.
Fascinating. In the spirit of more money, I wonder if there'll be like a stock market for creators where you can go long Mr. Beast. These guys are already, or people are already in the spirit of checking numbers all day and making a number go up and to the right. Maybe they could be able to raise money from a public that is betting. Do you see that happening?
I think people will try. I think the problem that I just foresee is like it also puts like a hit out on them, if that makes sense. Like as much as it's an amazing thing, like it also then makes them a target of like, let's try and figure out dirt to get them canceled because there is so much key man risk. It's not the same as in a startup where like there's a lot of other things being built there, but like if you have a bunch of people fully invested in speculating on Mr. B's success, like it is going to put a hit out on him in some ways.
Yeah, maybe there's a way to long only, but
exactly.
This is a great place to wrap. I want to be mindful of your time, Blake. This has been a masterclass on all things the creator economy. For people who want to learn more, where can you point them to?
Just follow me on Twitter if this is interesting. I'm at Blake IR.
Check out Blake's essays, his reading lists, his YouTube. There's a lot of great stuff there. Blake, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
Riverside is a presenting sponsor of Media Empires. It's an essential part of our tech stack. Riverside makes scaling a media business possible for us and so many podcasters and creators. It's our online recording studio, not just for the show, but across the entire podcast network. Riverside lets us record interviews with the best guests from wherever they are in the world. Our team can also cut short-form clips directly from Riverside, because as any listener of this show knows, you create once and then publish everywhere. Sign up for Riverside.fm today by following the link in the description box and use our code Media Empires to get a 20% discount.